Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the Angular 2 crash course. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you may have seen that I do have an Angular 2 playlist where I go over all the basics and fundamentals, but you may have also noticed that there's some things that no longer work in that series. That's because I made those videos back when Angular 2 was still in the release candidate stage. So there's been some changes to the framework and the syntax, leaving some of those videos useless. So Angular 2 is now stable, and I'm making a all-in-one guide or crash course, whatever you want to call it, with the updated syntax. Alright, so we'll be using Angular 2.2 stable for this course. Now, we're going to go through a few slides for people that are just starting out, so we can go over exactly what Angular 2 is and some of the fundamentals. Then we'll jump into some code from there. Now, after you finish this guide, I would suggest that you check out my 12-project Angular 2 course from Eduonix. That way you can get some actual projects and some actual applications under your belt. Alright, and I'll leave a link in the description. Alright, so what you should know before going through this course or guide, you should know HTML and CSS. Now, CSS isn't important in this particular video, but I would suggest getting really good with HTML and CSS before starting hardcore JavaScript. You should know some basic JavaScript before getting into Angular, but you don't have to be a pro by any means. You should basically just know the fundamentals of programming, things like functions, conditionals, loops, things like that. So what is Angular 2? There's a lot of different JavaScript technologies out there. Some are libraries, some are plugins, extensions, frameworks. Angular 2 is a framework, okay, and it works on the client side. It's not a server-side framework, but I'll go into what it's not in a second. And it's used to create very powerful web applications. It was created and is maintained by Google. It is the most popular JavaScript framework to date, and it's often described as what HTML would have been if it were created for dynamic web applications and not static websites. So as I said, Angular 2 is not a server-side technology. It runs on the client. It can be used on the server, but it's based to run on the client side. It's not a JavaScript library such as jQuery or React or MooTools or anything like that. It's not a design pattern like Model View Controller or MVVM or anything like that. It's not a platform like .NET. It's not a language. It's also not a plugin or an extension. Okay, it's a client-side framework. So what Angular 2 offers, these are just some of the things that it offers, but we have dynamic HTML. Okay, so as I said, it's basically what HTML would have been for applications, because in applications you have a lot of dynamic functionality. It's not just markup to display a static website. It uses powerful templates, fast rendering, uses HTTP services, so you can make GET requests and POST requests. It uses components, so it has a component encapsulation, which is extremely helpful and makes your applications that much cleaner. Form and input handling, event handling. It has routing, uses the latest JavaScript standards, uses ES 2015, TypeScript, and much, much more. So what's new from Angular 1? Well, Angular 2 is completely different than Angular 1, and a lot of people ask me if they should learn Angular 1 first, and I would definitely say no, because I think that it will do nothing but confuse you, okay, because it's very different. Angular 1 uses controllers and scope, which are not included in Angular 2. Angular 2 basically replace that with components. Okay, everything's based inside of a component now, which makes our code cleaner, makes it more reusable. It also has a reduced learning curve since everything's encapsulated in a component and no longer in scope and different controllers. It's a little easier to learn. It also uses TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, and I'll get into that in a second. And it also uses ES 2015, which is also known as ES6, okay, which is a later standard of JavaScript. It offers better mobile support for mobile apps. It also uses reactive extensions, or RxJS, which is a set of libraries to work with asynchronous data. Okay, and it also gives us something called observables. So what is TypeScript? As I said, it's a strict superset of JavaScript. So basically, it's everything JavaScript is with some added features. It's maintained by Microsoft. It gives us some features such as static typing, makes it look a little bit more like, let's say, Java or C++ languages like that. It also gives us class-based, object-oriented programming, which is extremely helpful, and that's basically what Angular 2 is based off of, is classes. Okay, every component is a class. So components are the main way to build and specify elements and logic on the page. They're basic building blocks of the user interface. An Angular application is basically just a tree of Angular components. Decorators allow us to mark a class as an Angular component and provide metadata that determines how the component should be processed, instantiated, and used at runtime. So this is an example of a component. We're importing the main component package from Angular, and then this is a decorator. Okay, when you see this @ syntax, this is a decorator, and we can provide metadata. All right, so the selector is basically what we'll use for the tag, the HTML tag, to insert the component. The template is the content of the component. In this case, it's a div with some text. You can see we have this double curly brace syntax. This is interpolation. Basically, we're bringing in a dynamic variable, all right, called name. Now, if we go down here into the class, you'll see in the constructor we're saying this.name equals max. So we're setting this name property to max, and that's what's going to display up here. We can also have events. Okay, so this button here has a click event. Events always have parentheses around them, and then we're calling a function that's called say my name. All right, and then you can see that down here under the constructor, and it's basically just going to console log my name is, and then whatever's in that property. In this case, it's max. All right, now if that's confusing to you, that's absolutely fine. We're going to get more into that later. So in addition to components, we have services, which are used for reusable data services to share between components throughout an application. So services, basically, you want to use those to access data. Okay, if you're working with an API where you're fetching data from a database or a backend, you want to put that in a service so that you can access it from all components. Okay, you don't want to just stick it in one component because then you can't use it from other ones. So you want to use a service for that. It keeps the components lean and focused on supporting the view. And services are asynchronous, and we can return data as a promise or an observable using reactive extensions. All right, and I'll get into that a little later. So we're just about done with the slides. Before we get started, I just want to go over some of the installation methods. So you can create an Angular 2 app from complete scratch. You'll have to install it using npm, and it can get kind of difficult. So I would suggest using the quick start. This is the GitHub link to the quick start. That's what we'll be doing. There's also an Angular CLI tool. You can install that with npm as well. You want to install it globally. We're not going to use the CLI tool in this video. However, I do have other videos where we do use it. All right, so we'll use the quick start. Now the requirements: you're going to need Node.js installed, npm, which is Node Package Modules. That comes with Node.js, so you don't have to worry about installing that separately. And then you're also going to need Git. All right, and I'll give you the links in a second to get those set up. All right, so that's going to do it for the slides. Now we're going to jump in. We're going to set up Angular 2, and we'll get started. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, if you don't have Node.js installed, you want to get that set up, just go to nodejs.org. Go ahead and download and install it. It's really easy on Windows. It's just a standard Windows installer. And then if you're on Linux or Mac, it's also easy. I do have a tutorial showing you how to install it in Ubuntu. It's also easy with a Mac. Just go ahead and look at the documentation. Excuse me. Now, I'd also suggest that you get Git, especially since we're using the quick start. We're just going to clone it using Git. If you're on Windows, you just want to go to gitscm.com, click on this download for Windows, and just get that installed. All right, once you have that installed, you'll have access to the git bash utility, which is a command line utility. I would suggest using that, but of course you can use your Windows command line as well. So this is the Angular 2 website, angular.io. This is where you want to find all the documentation, all that good stuff. But what we want to do is get the quick start. Okay, so that's at github.com/angular/quick start. And you can download the zip if you want. If you click on this here and then click download zip. But we're just going to clone it using git. Okay, and it has a command right here that we can use. So what I'm going to do is open up my, let's see, I'm going to go to my C drive and then projects. Now, like I said, if you have the git bash utility, you can right click and then just click git bash here, and that'll open up a command line right in that folder. Okay, so what I want to do is clone the quick start into that folder. So I'm just going to grab this command and paste that in. And instead of calling this my proj, I'm going to call it my app. Alright, so let's go ahead and run that. And what that did is it created a folder called my app with the quick start in it. So I'm going to say cd my app so that we can go into that directory. Alright, now before we install the dependencies, I'm going to add it to my editor, which I'm using Visual Studio Code, which I would suggest either this or Atom is what I use for Angular 2 because it uses TypeScript and it has some really good TypeScript highlighting. So let's see, we're going to add a project folder here of my app. Alright, so this is the quick start. This is what it gives us, and I'm definitely not going to go through all of this. We have the index.html file. Okay, this has the main my app tag right here. That's where the main app component's loaded. Also has all the includes that we need, script tags. Now, if we click on package.json, this is where all the dependencies are. You can see Angular actually comes in a bunch of different packages. We have the common, the compiler, the core, HTTP and forms modules. It comes in a bunch of separate packages. So in order to install all of this, we have to go over and say npm install. Okay, so that'll get everything set up. It'll create a node modules folder for us. Okay, it might take a minute or two. And you can see down here all the other dependencies. We have our TypeScript right here. It comes with Light Server. That's the dev server that we can run. Reactive extensions right here. System.js gets all of our packages together. Karma, which is a testing utility, which we're not going to get into. But it does include quite a bit of stuff here, the quick start. Alright, so it looks like that's all set. You can see now there's a node modules folder. So now we should be able to run our dev server by saying npm start. And that should open it up in our browser. And there we go. So you can see that mine it's running on 33002. I think that usually it's on 3000. I might have something on that port right now running, so that's why it's on that, but yours may be 3000. Alright, so let's go ahead and just open up the console. It's good to have that open, F12 in Chrome. And then what we're going to do is just look at the files here. So in the app folder, this is where our components go. Now notice there's a bunch of different app.component files. What we want to focus on is the TS files. That's the TypeScript files that we want to edit. Alright, pay no attention to the map files or the spec or the JS. Basically, app component TS gets compiled into app component JS. So this is what we want to work in the TS. The compiled file is much more difficult to work with, so we're not going to touch that. The first file I want to look at is main.ts. This is basically where we bring in app module, okay? And then we're going to bootstrap that app module. Now, you don't have to really understand what this is. I'm just going to try to explain it quickly. Angular 2 has a bootstrap module that does just that. It bootstraps the entire application. All right. If we go into appmodule.ts, this is where we import ng module. That basically binds together all the components, all the modules, things like that. and then let's see, we have our app component.ts. This is the main app component. This is what's being imported. All right, now every component you have to import the component package from Angular core, and then it has a decorator called component, a selector, okay, we already looked at this in the slides, and then a template. And basically we're just going to say hello, and then whatever's in the name property, which you can see is Angular. So that's why we're seeing this hello Angular. Alright, and since the selector is my app, if we look at the index HTML file, you'll see that that's what it is right here, my app. Alright, so what we're going to do is in the main app component file, let's just experiment a little bit here. Alright, so let's add another property. We'll call it email. Alright, and we'll set this, you know what I'll do is set the name to John Doe. Let's set the email to john@gmail.com. Alright, so we should be able to put that in here now. I'm just going to put this on multiple lines. Now we're able to do this because we're using template literals. Notice that this is a backtick, not a quote. That allows us to use multiple lines. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's put a paragraph. Okay, we can put any HTML we want in here. And we'll put email. And then we'll use that double curly brace. And in here we'll say email. Alright, so let's save that. And that should reload. And there we go. I'm actually going to take away the... I don't want the H1 around the paragraph. So let's put that right... Actually, we'll just put it right here. Alright, so you can see that it's using interpolation and it's putting in the email value. So let's say we also want an address. We'll say address, and we'll set this one to an object. Okay, so we'll say street, say 12 Main Street. We'll put a city, say Boston, and a state. Okay, now if we go up here and we were to put in another paragraph, and then say address, and save, you can see that it just says object, okay, because it doesn't know which one of these to display. So what we can do is, if we want the street, we can say dot street. Okay, so we'll save that, and now it gives us a street. So let's add next to it address dot city, and then address dot state. Alright, so that gives us the address, and I'll put a label here as well. Alright, and we can wrap the label in strong tags. Now as far as the application, the application isn't going to do much. I just want to focus on the functionality and the syntax of Angular 2. Okay, so now that you know how to create variables or properties down here and use them up here, we're going to take a look at creating our own component. Instead of using this app component, I usually like to use this as kind of a meeting place for all of my subcomponents. So in the app folder, we're going to create a new folder called components. And inside there, let's create a new file, and we'll call it user.component.ts. Alright, make sure you use the TS. Alright, now you'll notice that automatically it creates user component JS and a JS map. Okay, so it automatically compiles the TypeScript files. Now I'm going to copy everything we have in the app component TS and put it in the user component. And then we're going to change the selector to user, and then we're going to change the class to user component. Alright, so we'll save that, and then what we want to do is, when you add a component, you need to add it to the app module.ts file. You can see we're importing the main app component. Now let's import the user component. Okay, and that's going to be in the components folder / user component. All right, now we have to, what did I do here? We have to also add it to the declarations. Anytime we create a component and we import it, we need to add it here as well. Why do I keep misspelling that? All right, so let's go ahead and save that. Now, if we go to our app component now, we want to get rid of all this, and we can now use user. All right, now we're using user because that's what we used as our selector right here. Okay, and then down here we can actually just clear all this out. So let's go ahead and save that, and it should look the exact same, but now this is coming from our user component, not the main app component. So now what I want to do is in our user component, we're going to create a constructor. And this runs every time the component is rendered. So if we say console.log constructor ran and we save it, and when it reloads you'll see we get constructor ran. Now we can change any of these properties we want down here. So if we say this, okay, you want to use this, and we'll say .name equals, let's say Sam Smith. Okay, if we go ahead and save that and let it reload, now we get hello Sam Smith. Now a good way to do this is not to define the values up here, but to or at least define the actual value. You can define the variables. In fact, you have to define the variables, so the properties. But we want the values to be down here. So let's go ahead and just copy all of this and put it in here. Actually, let's move this back. All right, and we'll tab these over. So we want to set all of these to have this dot in front of them. Alright, and then up here we don't want to actually define the value, but we do want to define the property variable. And then for address, just go like that. Alright, so if we save that, that should still work. But it's good practice to use typing, okay, or typings. So for name, we know that that's going to be a string. So we can actually define that to be a string. Okay, same thing with email, that's also a string. Now for address, that's an object and it has certain fields inside of it. So what we can do is create an interface for this address property. So down here, let's say interface address, and we want to define the fields. So name, which will be a string. I'm sorry, not name, street. We have city, string, and state, string. Alright, and then all we have to do up here is say that we want this to be of the type address. Okay, so we'll save that. And if we look at the command line that's running the server, if there's any errors, this will tell us. Alright, now let's say that we want, let's throw this off a little bit and change this street to the word streets. Alright, now you can already see we're getting an error here. It's saying that the type address does not have streets in it. Okay, you can see it doesn't exist. Streets doesn't exist in type address. If we save that, this should also tell us that. So if we look right here, where is it? Streets does not exist in type address. So whatever we have here should match the interface. Okay, so we'll change that back to street. So now what I want to do is I want to add an array of hobbies for this user. Okay, so let's say hobbies, and we want to set that to string, but it's going to be an array. So you want to add the brackets. And then down here we'll say this dot hobbies, and let's say music, movies, and sports. Okay, so up here, let's put in H3 and we'll say hobbies. Now if we just put in our double curly braces and we say hobbies, let's save that. Now if you want this format to just have each hobby with a comma, that's fine, you can leave it like that, but a lot of the times you'll want to loop through an array and then maybe output a list item or whatever it is you want to do with each one. So to do that, we can use the ng_for directive. So let's say we want a UL, and then inside here we'll have LIs. Now we want to loop through those hobbies and output an LI for each one. So in here we're going to say *ng_for, and we're going to set that to hobby of hobbies. Alright. Actually, there should be a let right here. So let hobby of hobbies. So now we should have access to each one using this variable. So inside the LI, we're going to put our double curly braces and put hobby. Okay, let's save that. And now you can see that it's outputting a list item for each hobby. Now, in addition to ng_for, we also have ng_if. So what I'm going to do here is create another property called showHobbies, and we're going to set that, well, we're not going to set it here. We're going to set the type to Boolean. Okay, and then down here, let's say this dot showHobbies, and we're going to set that to false. Actually, this should be Boolean. So we're setting it to false. Now let's wrap this in a div, and we're going to put ng_if equals showHobbies. Okay, we'll wrap the UL. Alright, so if we go ahead and save that and reload, let's see, can't bind to NF, oh, that should be ng_if. Okay, so now you can see the hobbies are not showing anymore. So now what we'll do is let's create a button that is linked to, that has a click event that's linked to a function to display those hobbies. So we'll go right above the ng_if we just created and put a button. Now whenever you want to use an event, you use parentheses and then whatever that event handler, okay, which is going to be click. And then we'll set that to a function. Let's call it toggle hobbies. Alright, and then here we'll say show hobbies. Alright, so if we save that, that'll show a button. Okay, right now if I click it, we get an error because there is no toggle hobbies function. So let's go create that down here. After the constructor, let's say toggle hobbies. And just to test it out, we'll say console log show. Now if I click it down here, you can see we get show. Alright, so what we want to do now is we want to set show hobbies to true. So we can easily do that by saying this dot show hobbies equals true. Save it. Now if I click it, it shows our hobbies. Now I want to make it so that if we click it again, it hides them, so it kind of toggles them. So what we can do is do an if statement here. So we'll say if this dot show hobbies is equal to true, then we want to set it to false. and then we'll say else, and let's wrap this. We'll set it to true. Okay, so if we go ahead and save that, now if I click it, shows it, click it again, it hides it. Alright, now we can also set conditionals up here. For instance, if they're hidden, we want it to say show hobbies, but if they're displayed, we want it to say hide hobbies. So what we can do is, let's open up our curly braces here, and we'll say look at the show hobbies value. If it's true, then we want this to say hide hobbies. If not, we want this to say show hobbies. Alright, so now let's save it. Now if we click that, now it says hide hobbies, okay, and it switches. Alright, so we've covered quite a bit already in this very simple application. What I want to do now is go over inputs, okay, and data and binding. Okay, so we can create an input and bind it to any of these properties. So what we'll do is go, let's see, what do I want to put? We'll go under everything, and let's create a form. We actually don't even need the form tags, but I think it's good practice. Alright, so let's say label name, put a line break, and then we'll have an input with the type of text. Okay, that's going to have a name of name, and then we're going to use what's called ngModel, and that's used to basically bind this to a property. Now ngModel it's basically two-way, so we have to use brackets and parentheses, and then we're going to say ngModel equals, and we want to bind it to the name property. Alright, now if I save this, we're going to get an error. Okay, we get an error because we need to include the forms module in order to use ngModel. So we need to go to app.module.ts, and up here we're going to say import forms module, and that's going to be from at Angular/forms. Okay, now we have to include that in the imports right here. Let's say forms module. Okay, we'll save that. And now you can see that we have this input. It says John Doe. If I go ahead and clear that out, you'll see that it actually binds to that H1 up there. Alright, I'm actually going to get rid of the hello. We don't need that. Okay, so whatever we type in here is going to reflect up there, which is really cool. Obviously when I reload, it's going to go back because we're not persisting the data, but it is, however, bound to that property. Alright, so let's just add some for the rest of them. I'm going to actually put a line break here, and we'll copy that. Okay, so we have name. Let's also do the email. And when you use ngModel, you also have to have a name attribute with the same value. So email, what else do we have? We have our address fields, so let's say street, and we can actually set this to address.street. Okay, this will be the city, and we'll set that to address.city. This will be what? State. Alright, so let's see, let's also put, I'm going to put an HR right here. Alright, let's save that. So now we have our form, and it has all the different values, and no matter what we change here, you can see that it's actually changing it up above as well. All right, let's actually put an H3 here. We'll say edit user. All right. Now we can also work with forms without using ngModel and using that binding technique. So what I want to do is create an input here to add to this hobbies list. So let's go right under the UL and we'll put an input. Actually, let's just copy one of these. Okay, and we'll just say add hobby. And we're not going to use ngModel here. Oops. Okay, so we're not going to use ngModel, but we do want to identify this input. So we're going to use a number sign, and then we're going to call this hobby. All right, now we're going to wrap this actually in a form tag. Okay, and we're going to add an event handler onto the form tag for submit. So let's put in parentheses and we'll say submit. And when it's submitted, we'll call add hobby. Okay, now we want to pass along this input value. So right here, we should be able to say hobby.value. All right, so let's add that down here. Say add hobby. And that should take in hobby. And then let's just do a console.log hobby. Okay, so let's make sure that works. We'll say test and enter, and we get test. So all we need to do now is to push that onto the hobbies array. So to do that, we can say this.hobbies.push and pass along hobby. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll say poetry, enter, and then it adds there. All right, we can add as many as we want. If we reload, it's going to go away, of course, because we're not persisting it to a database or an API or anything. But you know, this is all about the user interface right now. Now, if we want to be able to delete these from the interface, that's easy as well. So let's go up here, and we're just going to add a button next to the hobby. We'll give it a click. We'll set it to delete hobby. Okay, and for the text, I'm just going to put an X. All right, now we need to know which hobby we want to delete. So we want to pass along the index. Now when we do an ng4, we can also add to the end of this, we can put a semicolon and then say let, I'm going to say let I equals index. All right, and then what we'll do is pass that I along to delete hobby. So now let's go create that. Okay, delete hobby, that's going to take along the index. And then all we have to do here is splice from that array that index. So we can say this.hobbies.splice, pass in the index, and we just want to delete one from that index. So let's save it. And now if we go and click show hobbies, let's say movies, we can go ahead and delete that. All right, we can add them and we can delete them. Okay, so now what I want to do is create a service. Okay, so we're going to look at two things here. We're going to look at services. We're also going to look at the HTTP module. Okay, I want to be able to make a request to an outside API and bring data into our application. All right, so we want to grab data from, I don't remember the exact URL, but it's this right here, jasonplaceholder.typecode.com. Okay, this basically gives us a free online REST service, and we can get posts, comments, albums, photos, to-dos, or users. Okay, so we want to grab some posts, and it shows you the different routes you can use. You can even make post requests, puts, deletes, but we want to make a get request to posts. Okay, and you can see that it gives us, I think, 100 different posts with an ID, title, body. So what we want to do is set up a service. So in the app folder, we'll create a folder called services. And let's create a file. We'll call it posts.service.ts. Alright, and then let's see, in here we want to import a couple things. We want to import something called injectable, because we want to be able to inject this service as a dependency. So that comes from Angular/core. And then we want to be able to use the HTTP module, so we're going to import HTTP from Angular/HTTP. And we also we're going to be working with an observable through reactive extensions, and we want to import the map operator so that we can map that data. So we want to say import rxjs/add/operator /map. Alright, now to use the injectable, we're going to add the injectable decorator, just like that, and then we can create our class, which we need to export. So export class, and we're going to call it posts service. Alright, now inside here we'll create a constructor, and let's just do a console.log, and we'll say posts service initialized. Now in order to use this HTTP module, we need to import it through here. So we're going to say private HTTP and set it to that HTTP, just like that. Now we want to use this in our user component, so we're going to go to our user component and we need to import the service up here. Okay, so import posts service, and that's going to be from, we want to go .. / outside of the components folder into services, and then post service, right? Or no, post.service. All right. Now we also need to add that as a provider. So we're going to go in the component decorator under the template, which ends right here. And we need to say providers, which is an array, and then we want to pass in post service. All right, so if we save that, we're going to get an error, or we should, I would think we'd get an error, because we need to import the HTTP module. All right, so let's go into app.module.ts, and just like we imported the forms module, we're going to add here HTTP module, which comes from Angular/HTTP, and then we also need to add it down here. Alright, we must not be getting the error because we haven't tried to use the service function yet, or we haven't created it yet. So inside post service, under constructor, let's create a function called getPosts. Alright, and then from here, what we want to do is make a get request. So we're going to return this.http.get, and then we want to pass in here the URL we want to get from, which is going to be this right here. Okay, we'll paste that in there, and then we want to go on the next line and say .map. Okay, this is going to actually we want to return an observable, so we want to map response to res.json. Okay, it's going to be in JSON format, and that's it. So let's save it, and then what we want to do is call this from our component and load up the post. So let's go to user component TS, and we'll go down to let's see, the constructor. That's where we'll do this. And we should be able to use the post service, but we need to inject it into the constructor. So we're going to say private post service, and we're going to set it to posts service, which we imported up above. Alright, and then in the constructor, let's say this dot posts service, and we want to call the get post function. Now this is going to return an observable, so we have to subscribe to it. Alright, so let's do dot subscribe, and then in here that will give us our posts, and we can set it to an arrow function, and for now let's just console.log posts. Okay, see what that gives us. Save it, and there we go. So you can see it's giving us 100 posts with titles, bodies, IDs. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to have a property up like we do up here for posts. So let's say, I'm sorry, up here we'll say posts, and we're going to set it to post. Okay, and that's going to be an array. So now this is going to be an interface that we create, just like we did with the address. So we'll say interface post, and that's going to have an ID, which will be a number. It'll have a title, string, and a body string. Alright, and then what we want to do is set this dot posts equal to the posts that are coming in from the observable from the service. Okay, so we'll save that, and then we should be able to access the post from our template. So let's go up here. Under the form, we'll put an HR, put an H3, and we'll say posts. Okay, and just like we did with the hobbies, we're going to use ng4. Okay, but I want to put that in a div. So ng4 equals let post of posts, and then in here let's put an H3. That'll be where the title goes, so let's do post.title, and then a paragraph, and we'll say post.body. Okay, let's save it, go back, and there we go. There's all the posts coming in from the API. Now this is getting a little cluttered with all this HTML, all this markup in the template. So what we can do is we can actually set a separate file for the template. So if we say inside components, let's say new user.component.html. Alright. And then what we'll do is from the user component TS, we're going to grab from the H1 all the way down to the last div. We're going to cut that out and paste that in the HTML file. Save it. And then in here, we're going to change this to template URL. Oops. I'll change it to template URL and set it to user.component.html. Now in order to use relative paths here, we have to actually add something else here to our decorator. You know what, let me just tab these over. So we have to add module ID and then set it to module.id. Okay, and that will give us a text editor error, but it should be fine. Alright, so let's go ahead and save that. And now it should be coming from the HTML file. So just to test it out, let me just say test, and there it is. Okay, so just to separate things a little bit, kind of thins up your component file. So we've looked at quite a bit so far: components, binding, templates, events, directives, services. The last thing I want to look at is routing. Okay, so we're going to just implement the router. Now what I want to do is create another component, and this is going to be called about.component.ts, and let's just copy everything that's in the main app component ts file. Okay, and then we'll just paste that in. Let's change the selector to about, and then in the template, let's just put an h1, and we'll say about this app. Okay, then we want to export about component. Alright, now what we have to do to be able to use this is bring it into app.module, just like we did with the other components. So let's go ahead and do that. About, that's going to come from about.component. Okay. Now it's not going to show up anywhere because we haven't loaded it. I mean, we could include it in the main app component, but I want to add a router so that we can actually go to /about, and that'll load that template up, or that component up. So to start off with the router, we need to create a file inside the app folder, and we're going to call this app.routing.ts. Alright, and then in here we want to import a couple things. We want to import something called module with providers, and that's going to be from Angular core. And then we also want to import routes and router module, and that's going to be from Angular/router. Alright, now we need to bring in the components that we want to use in the router, which is going to be the user and the about component. So let's go ahead and do that. User component, that's going to be from ./components/user.component. Okay, we also want to bring in the about. Alright. So now we want to create a variable. I'm going to use const, and we're going to say app routes, and then colon routes, and we're going to set that to an array of objects. Okay, this is going to take a path. Now this is going to be for the root path, so we're going to leave that blank, and we want to use the user component for that root. Alright, and then we also want the about. So we're going to say path about component will be, about component. Alright, and then finally we just want to export down here. Say export const routing, and then just throw in that module with providers equals router module. And then we're going to say .for root, and then we just want to pass in that app routes variable, and that's it. So let's go ahead and save that. Then we want to go to our app module ts file, and we're going to go right here and import routing from app.routing. And we have to add that in the imports right here, just like that. Okay, we'll save that. Now a couple other small things we need to do. We're going to go into our index.html, and then right below the opening body, we're just going to put in base, href equals and then slash. So we're setting our route, our base route. All right, so let's save that. And then we want to go to our main app component. And instead of, where are we? Main app component. Instead of outputting user, we're going to output router-outlet. Because this is now dynamic depending on whatever route URL we're at. All right, let's save it. And let's see. Not part of any ng module. Let's see what the problem is here. If we go to app module. Oh, we didn't add the about component to the declaration. Okay, we'll save that. Okay, so the home route is showing the user component. That's good. Now let's go to /about. And now it's showing the about component. All right, so if we were to add more components, we could add them to our routes by adding them right here. Okay, so that's how we can use the router. And if we want to put a link to the about page, let's see, we could put that in the main app component, HTML. So right here, if we want to now as far as linking to our routes, we want to use router link. So router link to slash for the home, which is also the user component. All right, let's save that. And then this will be to about. That's going to go to /about. All right, I'm not going to focus on what it looks like. It's if you want to bring in Bootstrap and make it look better, that's simple. All right, so now if we click about, takes us to about, home takes us back to the user component. All right, so that's how we can implement the router. So we're going to go ahead and stop here. I would definitely suggest that you move on to my 12 project course. It is extremely cheap for the amount of content that it includes. If you don't feel like spending any money, that's fine. I would suggest moving on to one of the Angular 2 projects that I have on YouTube. Alright, so that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't like it, and I will see you next time.